where the cry was, they will not pass. So since every one of the verbs of this poem is negated, and this is just a very, very small section of the poem, the scenario she presents is expressed as not likely to materialize. So the dominant image which recurs throughout the poem is that of barbarians. In each of the poem's 7 stanzas, the same 2 sentences recur. They won't erase the traces of our footsteps. No, the barbarians will not pass. So that is reoccurring throughout the poem. The anaphoric use of both of these lines, as well as the utterance "ils ne," they won't, or they will not. Okay, that begins every other line of the text, strengthens the injunction, and heightens the insistence of the poetic voice. One stanza, the first, stands for us as an example. Again, I'll read it in French. Ils ne briseront pas le rêve, ils ne déracineront pas le jasmin épanoui, ils n'éteindront pas le chant, ils ne figeront pas le sourire sur nos lèvres, ils n'écraseront pas l'épi, ils ne se dresseront pas sur notre chemin, ils ne effaceront pas les traces de nos pas, non, les bavards ne passeront pas. Perceived as it is in its globality, its totality, the aspect here expressed in futurity, in the negative futurity, views a reality that's not only in which political freedom is preserved, they won't obscure the springtime, they won't impose their law, they won't kill, and so on, but one in which Tunisia and its way of life remain untouched. They won't uproot our olive trees. They won't alter the taste of honey. They won't steal the moon. And in this case, of course, this is referring to the flag, the Tunisian flag to the moon on it. They won't trample down our fields, etc. So the proliferation of the future tense in this text, in which I might add no other tense is present, has the effect of cutting off in advance the semantic progress of any of the verbs employed. At the same time, by articulating what will not occur, the author effectively opens the possibility of its occurrence. If in these poems there are any heroes, any categories of beings who, by their strength, constancy, and courage, distinguish themselves from others, it is women. Women from another generation who instilled in their progeny bravery, commitment to a cause, and love for country. In the poem Elle, the poet evokes these women. Sur leurs frêles épaules, elles portent le ciel, ensemencent la terre, auréolées de sueur, dos courbés, mains offertes, les verbes altiers, accents de miel, comme les palmiers. Elles veillent la mémoire, tresquant des champs, combat harassant, nuit écortée, jour blafard. Elles enfantent les rebelles qui tisseront la délivrance. This is from August of 2013. Penned after the revolution, this poem presents the women in kaleidoscopic detail. They're women who, although frail, bear great burdens. Through sweat and hard labor, they work the fields, sowing seeds, reaping harvests. These are women whose very lives suggest the Tunisian figures of honey and palms. This class of women partakes of a society of women in which they recall the past and weave together songs and stories. Life for them is not easy. It can be a struggle, with its 2 short nights and its pallid days. These are the women, the poet concludes, who give life to the rebels, who will weave together deliverance. Elles enfantent les rebelles qui give birth to rebels, qui tisseront la délivrance. As many of today's poems, this one ends in a couplet expressing optimism. It's perhaps worth noting in this brief collection of texts, the verb enfanter, to give birth, occurs 3 times. For this poet, the generative force is strong and promises a future of new contributors to the struggle of freedom. In terms of aspect, the last verb of the poem is global. Strictly speaking, it connotes the unfolding of an action outside the temporal bounds of the poem. The aspectual future is unbounded, whether the passage of time implicit in the verb tisser, will weave, will have a perceivable beginning or end, is not specified. For the reader, the global aspect of tisser draws all the more attention to the preceding verbs of the poems, which are all imperfective. The unfolding of the verbs selected, carry, sow, keep watch, weave, give birth, are unlimited, and suggest to us that the status and activities of these women are ongoing, stable, unyielding, and invincible. If the poetic voice of Tunis Tabet is one of hope, buoyed by past events that result in ongoing situations or present moments, it, poetic voice, sometimes springs from a heightened sense of urgency. In such moments, the movement of the verb is expressed not solely by aspect that envisions the beginning or the ending of a process, but by directive modalities, or by a process projected into the future. We've got time for this last poem. In her poem, Renaissance, for example, the dominance of perfective verbs, verbs which designate that which has already been accomplished, is responsible for the reflective mood of the poet's voice. And I'm not going to read it in French because of time. Written in the aftermath of the revolution, and at a time in which the speaking voice can recall the strife from 3 years prior, this is from April of 2015, and can revel in the changes that have been inscribed, that have inscribed their essence on the poet's frame of mind. The text, with its titular image of rebirth, foregrounds the miracle of dawn. The word liberty, and a manifestation of the azure sky. The ending of the poem, however, shifts emphasis from events that have taken place to the inchoative impulse, which emerges out of the past and into the future. Elle dérive dans mes rires la délivrance. Which is not in this part here. Not only is the tense of the verb dérivé present, but its aspect is inchoative, since the verb denotes provenance, or generative force. Here we read of deliverance, which results, and realize that for the poet, liberation is realized only after completed states and actions have been reviewed. So just have a very quick conclusion here. Despite a summary to speak of the poetic voice of Tunis Tabet, we might more accurately speak of a plurality of voice, since in this collection, the expression of the poet is multiple, and it's dependent not only on the subject at hand, but also on the events of the day, or the phases of these events. Thus, apart from a consideration of the imagery of the texts and the figures of style by which these texts take shape, it turns out that by means of attention to each poem and to its expressions of aspect, that we come to appreciate the rich diversity of the poet's voice, from courage to doubt, to uncertainty, to indignation, pride, and hope. Any questions or comments? Yes?
This is coming from a linguistic, but the first 3 poems that you presented, they almost categorically divided, and that was really neat how we had statives, inchoatives, then achievements, like you can follow the progression of the, it was really neat how the 3 poems kind of presented, and the 3rd poem was almost completely like achievement verbs, like things that were completed. I thought that was, again, it's neat to see something that kind of combines the linguistic and the literature. I just wanted to comment on how those 3 just like perfectly work out.
You know, for someone who thank you. For someone who studies poetry, it's tough. You know, when you read about poetry, you see stuff about imagery, I find that looking at the verbs, which is something that's not looked at, can really add something. And of course, I've cherry-picked poems, but I've got a presentation coming in 2 weeks in which I've expanded on this, and I've looked at all the poems, and I've also looked at what she wrote in Le Temps de Tunisie, because you can trace, her weekly, well, it's not a weekly column, but it's periodic columns, and you can see somehow, the frame of mind in which she was, and say, yes, this is this poem. Sometimes she will reproduce part of the poem in there as well. But yeah, I think it really opens up a way to study these poems.
I just wanted to echo that I think it's totally cool that you did a linguistic analysis of poetry. I mean that it's a nice bridge, But also in thinking in terms not only of the verbs, but what I was picking up on was in the poems that you presented, her address to the audience and her envisioning of the element of they, because it wasn't always the same group that she was invoking. In the tell them one,
yes.
I was thinking, who? Is she talking about the world? Is she talking about people who were in the shadows, afraid to come out? Who is she invoking in that call to this group of people? And then the no pasarán, obviously, is a declaration where this other group is not, they're being placed in the limits. And then in the women, I mean, that's a whole different they group. And then in this last one, it's where she finally brings that to a personal stance, where she uses I in the poem. So I thought, and these are obviously ones that you selected, but I thought that was interesting in the way that the address also played a role.
I was just very, very, impressed with her courage in a society in which, back in the 1960s, women had a lot of rights, but those rights have been eroded, and attitudes toward them have hardened considerably. And here, this is a person who is very strong in asserting her opinions and her through poems.
And probably to great personal risk.
Yes. Good. Thank you.